There we go. Welcome, everyone. I want to thank you to our Tuesday call, and we're so honored today to have Mr. Glenn LeBlanc as our presenter. And I really want to let you know that if you're on this call, if you've been invited to see this presentation, it is because someone really cares about you. And what you're going to find out is that this technology that Glenn is going to share with us is really life-changing. And Glenn has been in the health and wellness industry for about 35, 40 years, and he has extensive knowledge on how your body works, what nutrients are needed, and he is just um, he's just a I can't even get the words out. He's just an amazing individual. He's got a heart of gold. And if you have any questions at the end, he'll be happy to answer them. And I'm going to give it back to Glenn. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Desiree. And it's always exciting to share this technology that we have all seen help so many people. Um, we've heard a lot about stem cell therapies over the past number of years, and we're going to discuss the details of how some of it is being marketed, what technologies are actually working, and go through some of the new really good stuff that's out there with us. So as we get started, our relevant topics tonight, in order for you to understand how these therapies are actually working within us, we're going to talk on 4 different topics, one of them being phototherapy, which is a delivery method. We're going to talk about the GHK copper peptide, which is a necessary part for stem cells to be active, and how that's created and produced in our body. Obviously, the majority of our night will be speaking on the stem cells and their activity itself. And then we will finish with
I want to do anything at my house while I'm doing this, and then we can see if we can find a pool after or play a game.
Yeah. Leslie, if we can.
Leslie, can you please mute your phone?
Ooh.
Okay. And then we'll finish with a little discussion on water and its relevance to how stem cells actually perform within us. So let's talk a little bit about phototherapy, and that begins with a conversation on light waves. Light waves are nothing but energy that comes off of the sun. And of course, we recognize the visible light spectrum, but as we can see in the whole spectrum of energy, it is a very, very small little strip and that's what we see. And of course, that's what we think of when we think of light, but there are all of these other different wavelengths of energy, which is in effect light, that come off the sun, and each of them do different things. We're going to spend some of our time tonight in this infrared category. So let's talk about a process called refraction. If we take white light, our visible light, and we pass it through a crystal or a prism, we can actually refract those wavelengths into their individual wavelengths. And of course, in visible light, we see that as our different colors of the spectrum. But all of these other categories of energy also have wavelengths. And as you can see, some of them up to 1 million different wavelengths, and infrared being one of the larger ones. We don't see infrared, but with infrared cameras, here's a picture of an infrared picture of a person's back, and the different colors that are being separated out are different temperatures, but primarily those temperatures reflect different wavelengths of infrared light. Now, some animals that we know, all of our nocturnal animals actually see spectrums of infrared. It's how they can see in the dark. Our dogs even have a certain ability to see certain frequency ranges in infrared, which allows them to run through the house in the middle of the night and not run into things. And of course, you've seen infrared, not only cameras, as this is a picture of, but night vision goggles use infrared in order to see. And it works off of those different energy waves. and this will be important. One of the things we want to look at before we leave this picture is this section right here in the back, which is one of the warmest sections of our body, because of course we have our heart and our lungs and major blood vessels up to the head and different areas run through that, and we'll refer back to that a little later on tonight. So we've known for thousands of years that specific frequencies of light can change things within our body. When we go out in the sun, some frequencies in the ultraviolet range actually will produce vitamin D in our body, and numerous other chemicals, but that's one that people recognize and know about. Another frequency of UV can cause our body to make the chemical melanin, which is what gives us our suntan, which then again protects us from things, further damage from sun. So our skin, being the largest organ in our body, produces a vast amount of chemicals, and those chemical responses that our body uses in so many ways come from the light, from frequencies from our sun. And of course, we know without water and sunlight, we just can't survive, and it's because of this. And our skin is a big solar panel that performs tremendous amounts of duties based on the frequency of light that is actually touching it. So LifeWave, the company we're going to talk about tonight, has a patented technology that is based on that specific science, and we'll show you how that works. So the copper peptide, the GHK copper peptide complex. First of all, it naturally is occurring in our body. It is a combination of 3 different peptides, or 3 different amino acids, I'm sorry. And what constitutes a peptide versus a protein is, if we look at proteins, they are combinations of amino acids of 50 or more. We call it a protein. If it's under 50, it is referred to as a peptide. So amino acids are the building structures of all of our tissue. And this happens to be 3 different amino acids. And this particular peptide has an affinity to copper. All peptides and proteins, for that matter, ultimately bond themselves with a mineral because they utilize different minerals, the different peptides and proteins, to catalyze chemical reactions within our body. One of the things that you need to know too is that peptides are very pH sensitive, and they exist in much higher numbers, this particular one in particular, in slightly alkaline bodies. And we all know our body should be slightly alkaline. So as we become more acidic with age or with habits of foods and drinks that we consume, as we actually reduce the amount of blood serum level of these peptides that are available. Now, several complexes that occur naturally in human plasma. This one, the GHK copper peptide, is about 200 nanograms per milliliter when we're about 20 years old. And that's where it peaks. As our bodies mature through childhood and puberty, we are able to create and more of these complexes, but they peak right around 20 years old. And in this case, by the time we reach age 60, we've lost about 80% of the production of this peptide. But it's actually a little bit worse than that when we think about it, because between 20 and 60, that's a 40-year decline. But by the time we're 30 years old, we've lost about 60% of that production. So things begin to not respond or heal as quickly. This particular peptide has a number of amazing things that it does and is responsible for in our body. It promotes wound healing. It attracts immune cells to areas of infection. It's full of antioxidant production, and it's got anti-inflammatory responses in effect. It stimulates collagen synthesis in our skin. And of course, collagen is one of the main proteins that our body produces, which is involved in all connective tissue throughout our body. It promotes blood vessel growth. And in recent studies, they have showed that it can modulate expressions of genes, and it is generally can reverse genes that into a healthier state as they begin to change as we get older. So it has a tremendous amount of things. But here's another list of things that it can do as a form of benefits. First of all, it has absolutely no negative or side effects if our body produces it naturally. If we take it in a supplement form or through injections or whatever else, which is there's another administration of a supplement form, it actually does have side effects and our body doesn't utilize it well. But since we're capable of producing it ourselves, the product that we produce works very efficiently within ourselves. So some of its accomplishments is it'll stimulate, as I said, blood vessel growth and nerve outgrowth. So anytime we damage stuff that damages nerves, we need that regeneration. And this peptide is one of the ones that is responsible for that. It protects skin cells from harmful UV radiation. It attracts immune cells, as we mentioned earlier, reducing inflammation. It can increase hair growth and hair thickness. It can even help in the relief of pain, anxiety, and even aggression, because those kinds of things come from different chemical imbalances within our brains. Its anti-aging and skin benefits include improved elasticity, reduced photo damage, reduction in fine lines and wrinkles because of the improvement of our collagen matrix. It can improve bone density. It is responsible for some of that production of our density of bones. It can repair and rejuvenate nerve connectivity in our brain. And a very important one is it can up or down regulate over 6,000 genes, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail later. Its ability to repair lung tissue in people with COPD, DNA repair, generation, anti-cancer effects, and many of those benefits come from the stimulation of the proliferation of exosomes, production of a stem cell. So now we're going to start getting into stem cells and how they communicate and work together to do the regeneration process. So first, just know that of all clinical studies and research in the history of medicine, there's more being spent and done on stem cells than anything else in the past. And right now, there's well over 5,000 to 6,000 clinical studies being conducted worldwide. You can actually look those up on clinicaltrials.gov and read until your heart's content, because there are just thousands of them. And for good reasons, because these researches, these activities are showing tremendously good responses. And we look at all the research in every disease that we have studied and done research to try to alleviate over the years, and all of them are turning to stem cells in those studies as a way of doing those repairs. And of course, stem cells have been in the news. People like Shaquille O'Neal, Tiger Woods, probably the most famous, Peyton Manning, who broke his neck playing football and received some stem cell therapy that not only regrew some of those nerves, which they weren't sure he was going to walk, much less get full functionality in a high performance athlete as of his caliber. But actually the part of his neck that was broken, the stem cells repaired and made it even stronger than it was prior to that. Unfortunately, some of that treatment isn't even available here in the United States when he had it done, but it is still actually not. And there are some reasons that the FDA has not approved some of that. The other thing is it's extremely expensive. His treatment was over $125,000. It took over 8 months, and he had to live in Germany where he received that treatment for that 8-month period. So health insurances don't cover any of this. Some of it's still considered obviously very controversial, and it is ridiculously expensive. So it doesn't lend itself to the average person's availability. And that makes a big difference, because all of the wonderful things it might be able to do, if the average person can't get their hands on it, it won't do them any good, much less. So let's talk about a revolutionary change in how stem cell activity has been administered over the last few years. with an invention through the CEO of LifeWave. So everyone would love to look, feel, and live younger. Stem cells are the key to that because have the ability of repairing and regenerating. They're virtually a vital part of our immune system and repair and regenerate damaged tissue. So let's talk about a few basic fundamentals of stem cells so we understand what they do. One of the things is they're a very specific tissue structure, and they're not specialized tissue at that point. They are a stem cell. Three major components is they have the ability to divide and renew themselves for long periods of time. And we're looking at well over our lifespan. So within our lifespan, we can regenerate those stem cells as they are used in repairing tissue, and then we can regenerate and bring our levels back up to be utilized again. They are unspecialized, which means they're not a liver cell or a bone cell. They are a stem cell. One of their key abilities is they can specialize themselves. They can turn themselves into one of those specialized tissue. And in adult tissues, we find things like in bone marrow, muscle, brain, discrete populations of adult stem cells that generate and replace those cells as they're being lost to wear and tear, injury, disease, or whatever else. But how do they work within our bodies? Well, that process begins with their ability to communicate with each other, with other stem cells, and that communication is done with exosomes. So here's what exosomes are. They're an extracellular vehicle. It is something that mother stem cells create to communicate to the worker stem cells of what to go do and repair. They're basically RNA messengers. They are little information packages that the mother stem cell creates when it reads chemical signals from a damaged tissue in our body or a damaged section. And they then create these exosomes that have that communication, that programming that tells the workers what to do. And I'll show you how that works. The unfortunate part is that the production of exosomes declines dramatically. And by the time we're 30 years old, we've lost 60% of exosome production and consequently 60% of our stem cell activity. By age 60, the stem cells in our body show very little activity. And by age 70, we can almost not find any activity. So there's no wonder as we get older, we start showing problems that we didn't have when we were younger, because when we were younger and damaged that tissue, stem cells repaired it or replaced it, and we were still operating at full force. But if we're not replacing them and we're wearing them out, then we begin that decline. So notice that those percentages coincide exactly with the reduction of the copper peptide in our system, because stem cells require the chemical, the peptide, in order to create exosomes. And if they don't have the chemical available, they don't produce the exosomes. So let's look at how that works. So when we damage tissue, our body gives off a chemical signal throughout our bloodstream of that damage. Mother stem cells receive that information. They then produce exosomes with a very specific programming to not only be able to repair that tissue or replace it if it cannot be repaired, but how to get to it, where it is, the breadcrumb trail back to the damage. So here's an electron microscope picture of a mother stem cell. And all of these little hair follicles are what can capture those chemical signals within the blood based on some damage. And that allows it to then create a very specific programmed exosome. Here's an example. The green cell is producing exosomes as they go through the bloodstream. The pink one here is receiving them. And now that worker stem cell knows what to go repair. And it can go to and replace and regenerate knees, bones and nerves, lung tissue, a number of different things that we didn't think were possible years ago. I mean, if you had torn or worn out cartilage in a knee, you were told that the only way to fix that was to have a knee replacement. It's a low blood supply area. You were not going to regrow that cartilage. Well, that was true because as we age, the reduction in stem cell activity wasn't regenerating tissue as it's damaged. And in an area like our knee, where we're on it all the time, we're creating inflammation and damage just through the workload that the cartilage in that knee has to absorb. So if we're not fixing it, repairing it, regenerating it, it begins to wear out. We end up with bone on bone, and hence all the problems people have with knees. Well, we now know the stem cells can actually regenerate that, and given time, can avoid. But more importantly, is if we can keep our stem cells active rather than wait until we've aged to a point where we've degenerated these tissues. And instead of trying to replace that, if we are able to keep stem cells active through our youth and into our middle age area, we won't wear it out. And that's probably as important from a proactive standpoint of anything else. Here's an example of the green is a nerve that has been damaged, and all of these little red things are stem cells that have migrated to the nerve in order to do its repair. So let's look at some stem cell therapies and studies that go back. And I actually picked some from way back in 2002 because this kind of clinical studies and research being done back then was when stem cells were really in their infancy of how to use them to repair. And I wanted some of those old ones to show just how well and why the research has continued so dramatically. So in this case, we have a person with neuropathy. Neuropathy is when the nerve tissue in this case, their feet, is not working properly. It has either been destroyed. It could be from an injury, which very possibly this person had an injury on his toe. It could have been through diabetes, which will destroy those nerves. You've heard of people with diabetes having so much neuropathy. And unfortunately, as you kill those nerves off, you also stop the control of our blood circulation to the area. And then, of course, you've heard of people with diabetic ulcers on their feet that will never heal. They end up having amputations and different things. So if we look at before implantation, and these were implanted, in other words, injected stem cells, or in effect, they inject exosomes, not the stem cell itself. And in their left foot, they had some activity, all of these red lines and stuff. But in the right foot, very, very little blood flow throughout the foot. Only after 14 days after injection, look at the increase, not only in the left, but it came back to the right, which was almost non-existent back then. Some other pictures. Here's blood vessels. And this is important because so much of the research has been looking at blocked arteries in the heart and damage down line if you clog off an artery and kill off tissue in the heart. And to be able to grow new blood cells, peripheral cells, as an artery begins to be blocked, to be able to produce lateral arteries to feed the area prior to that vessel being completely blocked off and killing everything down line is another important thing. So here's two different examples. And in this case, we have a blockage right here. You can see how wide the artery is ahead of it, and it's blocked down. And you've got very little blood flow and artery down below it. And then after the stem cell injections, look at all the lateral growth of arteries around that section. And you're even beginning to see some healing in the blocked area itself, beginning to thicken again. Here's just another example in another spot and an increase. So that increase in blood flow, obviously bringing nutrients and oxygen to the area, is critically important. But what it does show is the ability, as we talked in the very beginning, of what the GHK peptide and consequently stem cells can do throughout our body in areas we may not even know we have a problem yet. It's doing repair all along that period. So let's talk about COPD. COPD is when we either have inflammation in the bronchial. If we have a healthy bronchial, it's wide open, and all of the alveoli, which are the little little air sacs that exchange carbon dioxide and oxygen into the bloodstream. Well, in a patient with COPD, if they have, for example, restricted bronchial, typically whenever we restrict something or we inflame that tissue, a mucus begins to form, and in order to protect the inflammatory area, in this case, we actually, the little bit of space left, we now fill it with mucus, that will stop any airflow. And then, of course, here in this example, all of the little alveoli have died off. And so this sac is not exchanging gases at all. And unfortunately, in people with COPD, this proliferates throughout the lung. They have less and less ability to exchange gas, and a number of things begin to happen. Lower oxygen levels. Body just literally can't absorb enough oxygen because so few of these air sacs are still alive and present and active. The other thing is we can't get rid of CO2, and as our blood levels of CO2 rise, our acidity rises, and then that causes an array of other problems. And ultimately, COPD patients, in addition to their total shutdown in their ability to perform, to even walk, the least little bit of activity, they can't breathe, is they're depriving their organs of vital oxygen. The organs begin to fail, and ultimately that's what these people die of, is organ failures. So if we look at some chest x-rays, we're going to show you just what stem cells can do. So here is an x-ray of a lung that is for pair of lungs with full of COPD. And the only sections that are undamaged are the black sections. The whole lung should look like this. And in the right side, we've got a few spots, but all of the white or marbled areas, especially in this left lung, or areas where the alveoli has died back off and is not exchanging gases. So if we look at these same pair of lungs after the stem cell, where we've had the ability to go in and do that repair, look at the difference in all of the black areas. We've totally regenerated all of those alveoli, allowing this person now to breathe and do all of the things that our lungs do for us in exchanging of gas. So, according to the National Institute of Health, COPD is the third largest cause of death in the United States. I had no idea of that. I mean, we think of heart disease and cancer, but so many other things we think of that cause death. I had no idea that COPD was that high up. There's 12 million diagnosed and climbing daily, and over another 15 million people undiagnosed, because it's such a slow, gradual process that a lot of times people who may have been extremely active in their younger days or less active, whether just because of their daily habits, their job may be very sedentary behind a desk all day, whatever, they're not getting out and doing the activity. They may not actually recognize that they are having more problems breathing. I mean, if they go out on a Sunday and try to do some sandlot ball, they may go, I just don't have the air capacity I used to. Well, these are things that are beginning to happen. We don't want to wait until the lungs are completely damaged and we are showing signs, because by then, by the time you're diagnosed, you have severe problem already. It would be much better, and as we were talking earlier, to be more proactive in regenerating that tissue as it's damaged, and it can be damaged from so many things. Certainly smoking, where people are pouring in tremendous amounts of damaging chemicals directly into their lungs constantly, can cause this damage. But all of us who may not smoke, you're breathing toxic things that are in our air. So our lungs take a beating on a regular basis, and we do damage. The body's ability to heal itself is totally dependent on stem cell activity. So the sooner a person can stimulate those stem cells in their body to be more proactive, they will stop some of this, and of course prolong their useful and active life. So as a quick little recap, the good news is that stem cells can heal damaged lung tissue. They can regrow blood vessels, and they can heal nerve connectivity in neuropathy patients. So these are some of the tremendous benefits that stem cell therapy has proven and to be able to do. So now it's a matter of how we're going to administrate it and get it to the average person that comes into play. One other thing, stem cells with rheumatoid arthritis, an inflammatory response from gene modulations that cause inflammation in joints that in effect damage the joints. It's a, your body actually begins to eat itself and damages the joints up. It's an autoimmune response. We talked about the GHK peptide being able to remodulate genes before I go to the next ones. This is a critical part of this because there's a reason at a certain age, things start happening to us. You've heard of people who have never had allergies of any kind that all of a sudden start getting seasonal allergies. People who have never been allergic to shellfish, for example, and all of a sudden they go out and have shrimp or a lobster and they come home with lips so big they can't breathe. What changed in them that one day they could eat it and the next day they couldn't? Well, there are genes that are responsible for controlling our allergic responses to different things in foods. And if those genes modulate all, if they turn off, if they may then allow this inflammation to happen. The remodulating of those genes back to their more youthful state can reverse that process, or more importantly, again, in a proactive status, stop it from happening from the beginning. And we know for a fact that there's over 6,000 genes that GHK copper peptide can help control and modulate and keep in proper check. That's a big part of not showing our aging as readily. So let's look at commercially produced exosomes, because up until this particular invention, the only way, and still the predominant way that's being studied through all of these companies, is through commercially produced exosomes. So where did that come from? Well, they are getting adult stem cells from umbilical cords. Number one, they're readily available and a constantly renewable source. Or adult stem cells, not fetal stem cells. The early studies of stem cell activity were on fetal stem cells, and those have not, all of that got abandoned quite early because of the problems that came from it. Some of those stem cells had not changed themselves into what they were going to be, and they were injecting those into people's, for example, their knee, and all of a sudden they were finding out that they were growing lung tissue and things. So they abandoned fetal stem cells a long time ago for that reason, and probably a number of other very good reasons that everybody can come to their own conclusion there. But adult stem cells are the critical ones that they use today. And where do they get them? Mostly through umbilical cords. What they do is they take that and they look for the stem cells that are actually producing exosomes. They segregate those out and they grow them in culture. And one of the ways that they grow them is they put fluids that are full of the GHK peptide in the solution that those stem cells are growing in, and it causes them to produce a lot of exosomes. They then capture the exosomes, and that's what they're actually injecting into a person. The problem with injectable stem cells or exosomes is that they're being produced in laboratory without the chemical response from an injury. So they are not specific in their coding of the exosome, the RNA packet that's going to tell the receptor or the worker stem cells what to go do. They're just being generally produced. Now, they're injecting them into the area of the problem, so they can't help but bump into the problem. And we do see repair without question. They are getting some great response. The problem is this process is painstakingly long, as well as it is very expensive. I mean, this can run up $10,000 an injection, and in certain cases, you may need 3 or more injections to see any results. But there are some other problems. Number one, the repair, if indeed it happens, doesn't last, because once those exosomes are used and those stem cells, we go back to the level of stem cell activity the person originally had. So if they regenerated a knee, but we're damaging the knee every time we walk on it, and we don't have active stem cells in our system because of our age, then we're re-damaging it. And of course, one of the things they will tell you is a few things. Number one, there's no guarantee it's going to do anything. We'll talk about that a little bit more. Number two, that it's a temporary fix. It's going to maybe take care of this issue now, but it may need to be repeated a few years down. And they're talking maybe 3 to 5 years repeating the process, because by then you're damaging it again and you're back to the problem you had before. So that is one of the problems. It's one of the reasons that so many of these therapies have not been approved by the FDA, because of their controversial aspect and the fact that there are problems with this. So let's look at them a little bit. Number one, as we said, expensive. Second, they're risky, because you're injecting something foreign into your body, and different people's body and immune systems will respond differently, and the immune system will attack it and kill them off before they have the ability to make any headway. Most often that is the worse the immune response would be. You may not even notice it. It's just that it kills them all off before they do anything. So you don't get any results out of all of what you just did. No guarantee, as we said, and it's because there's a hard 20% failure rate. Now, that's one of the reasons FDA hadn't approved so much of this. Rarely do you see the FDA approving some of these things, other than maybe in an emergency status, of things that have a hard 20% failure rate. They're not going to subject people to that when that's failure rates are so high. So here comes David Smith. Now, when we look at how different, what I want to say, when people are doing research and they're finding things and they're moving in the direction of in some cases, they'll refer to it maybe as a cure or a treatment. As different scientists all over the world discover things, they're taking what's already known and they're advancing that. And then as that advances, more people look at that advancement and they jump from there. Unfortunately, what happens is that begins to narrow down the process into a single line of improving what's already been done, but not looking at other aspects of how this might be able to be done. So David looked at this from a completely different side. He wasn't looking at putting exosomes in to a person to stimulate that little bit of activity. He was looking at what is the cause of the decline in exosome production, or in effect, stem cell activity within our body. And there's been many studies that showed that one of the main reasons is the decline in the production of this peptide. So, and people had tried using, as we talked about a little bit in the beginning, supplements. You can go to GNC and get the GHK copper peptide supplement, and you can take it, and your body doesn't utilize it well, so it doesn't work. And if you take it in doses, because it's not being utilized, it can build up and cause other problems. So there is side effects from it, and there are toxic levels that you can consume. So that didn't work. So David looked at, well, why is our body not producing it anymore? What was the process that it produced it, and why is it declining? And phototherapy, which was one of his strong backgrounds, is an area that he began to see what originally caused the production of it. We knew it was being produced from nerve endings within our skin. So in his area of phototherapy, he had already had well over 70 patents, a lot of things continuing to pend. He was doing a lot of research on how to use phototherapy, and we're going to talk about how that works. So leading the edge for well over 20 years in that line of study. He had already conducted over 80 clinical trials proving the efficiency of the LifeWave phototherapy practice of stimulation of our body and our skin producing a number of different chemicals with the search on how to produce this copper peptide. And in that process, he discovered numerous other peptides that our body produces that help in other things, production of melatonin. So he's got a sleep patch. The increased ability of the body to produce ADP, our energy within our cell. And so there's an energy patch. So as he was searching for the specific wavelength that caused our skin to produce the GHK copper peptide, along the way, he discovered a number of others, which he had been producing patches for that were being widely used. So in 2019, when he released the X39, which is the stem cell active patch, this company was already in it almost 16 years old. Very, very productive. It was a company worth producing millions of dollars worth of business a year. Debt-free company, solely owned by David. So no outside influence telling him what he can do, where he can go, where his studies needed to be put on. So here's some of the differences that the LifeWave patch can do. So how does this work? Well, it's a patch about the size of a quarter. And inside the patch, which there is some plant-based amino acid structures, crystals, that refract. So that's why we talked about this in the very beginning. We'll take infrared light waves that are coming off of our body. Remember, we don't see those light waves, but we can feel them. Heat, infrared is heat. So when our body's warm, if we give off heat, that is infrared. If he refracts those, breaks them into their individual wavelengths, and once he discovered which one of those wavelengths he needed, he then built a structure in that in that crystalline form to reflect that wavelength back into our skin. And in doing so, he stimulated the nerve endings in the skin to start producing the peptide again. So now our body's naturally producing it. And in doing so, you can reset our own stem cells through the natural process with no side effects, because our body utilizes, and there are no problems with the peptide that we manufacture within ourselves versus supplementally. And this happens very quickly. The other thing is the patch is non-transdermal, which means nothing in the patch enters your skin like other dermal patches, transdermal patches, where you put them on. Probably a perfect example of that are these nicotine patches that people try to use to get off of cigarettes. Is they put a little patch on. It's a transdermal patch. The body actually absorbs nicotine through the skin. If we put an essential oil on our skin, it very rapidly goes into the skin and goes into our bloodstream. This is not a transdermal patch. Nothing in the patch goes into our skin. Now, what's great about that is it doesn't have, like I said, side effects, but it also doesn't have allergic reactions. It also doesn't interfere with medications a person may be taking, because we're not introducing something foreign into the body. All we're doing is providing a stimulus factor that allows the body to produce this peptide naturally, which is homogeneous with our body and doesn't affect any of those things. And we begin to reset those genes, that modulation of those 6,000 genes into a much younger state. As the blood level of that peptide rises, our stem cells become more and more and more active. And in doing so, we start seeing repair. And it happens very quickly. We can see over a 700% increase in the peptide, just the GHK. It hasn't combined with copper yet, but that peptide begins to bond together within the first 24 hours. So in about 3 to 5 days, once you get a proliferation of the GHK peptide, then it combines with copper, which again, like I said, is minerals or what catalyzes the chemical reactions that these peptides produce. And then we start getting proliferation of exosomes. The stem cells start reading damage through chemical signals, creating exosomes with specific instructions of how to repair that, and the worker stem cells go to work repairing and regenerating. So we see within a few days the effects of the GHK peptide, reduction in inflammation, pain reduction, all of those things. By 3 to 5 to 10 days, now the stem cells have kicked into gear and they're repairing. And so we see greater and greater progress in a very safe and effective way. So if we look at in 2019, January was when he released the patch. It was a tremendous breakthrough in stem cell technology. Multiple pharmaceutical companies, and even till today, had spent billions of dollars on stem cell research and had not come up with this process. So it was very unique. And it is a one-of-a-kind patented technology. Now, what does it take to get a patent? Well, number one, when you have an invention of some kind, you present it to the patent office, the first thing that has to be proven is that it is unique and different. They're not going to let you patent somebody else's efforts. So it's got to be a different and unique product. This certainly was. And then it's got to do what you say it's going to do. So what did he say it was doing? He said it was taking infrared light coming out of our body in the form of heat, refracting it, separating the wavelengths so that they could pick out the one wavelength that they discovered that they could reflect back into the skin, causing the skin to produce the copper peptide, hence improving the blood serum level of that peptide, which is necessary for the stem cells to be active. Otherwise, they just all sit around with not knowing where to go and what to do. He got that patent in less than 15 months, which is unusual. It normally takes anywhere from 5 to 10 years to get some of these patents. But he was able to prove through all of the clinical trials that they had done that this patch did exactly what he said it did, and he was able to get that patent. So there is no competition for this. Nobody else can produce it. It's a 20-year patent, and for the next 20 years, this is the only company that can produce and distribute these. So it has been clinically proven to activate the peptide. And if you'd like to go to X39clinicalstudies.com, you can again read through all of those clinical studies. Some of them are going to get detailed, but you can read through them if you'd like and show you all of what they've been able to show this will do. Now, as I told you, before the X39 came out, there were a number of other patches, energy patches, patches for pain, all of these different things. And so athletes all around the world were already heavily using, and it was one of the reasons that the company was so successful up until the time. And since the X39 came out, it's just taken off even greater. The X39 has shown to improve sleep, and very quickly. We've had some studies done that show the amount of restful sleep, the amount of non-restful sleep, the amount of REM sleep you get. Now, if we're sleeping, we don't know what level of sleep we're in. We don't get a readout in the morning unless we're on one of these monitors showing how much of that. But we've shown that if a person's getting maybe 50 to 60% restful sleep, and in some cases, not any REM sleep, there's another importance to that, and a lot of their sleep is non-restful, there's activity and repair not getting done through non-restful sleep. With the very first day that they use the patch, and this patch is designed to be used for 12 hours during the day, so you put it on in the morning, take it back off that afternoon. The very first night, the same study showed a massive increase in restful sleep from 50s to low 60s all the way into the low 90s. Of course, with that amount of restful sleep, we have time for REM sleep. REM sleep is tremendously important, even though it's a very small section of our sleep process. Our body doesn't produce human growth hormone unless we go into REM sleep. So another aspect of it, improving sleep, amazing what it can do to, and this showed very quickly to stimulate that activity. Wrinkle reduction. We talked about improving the collagen matrix. Why does a young person's skin look so so smooth and non-wrinkled? Is because the collagen matrix is very refined and there's no little gaps in it that allow the skin to dimple and wrinkle in. Well, within 4 to 12 weeks, we can see noticeable change in our skin by the use of the X39. And we know why. We've improved the collagen matrix. We're actually going back to producing a much healthier collagen and, in effect, skin. But that also takes place in all connective tissue within our body. So the arteries in our heart and our blood vessels, all of that improve. That's another thing that in one of the studies they showed, is that within a few weeks of using the patch, the age reduction of your arteries, the has gone backwards, which is unbelievable that you can renew the elasticity and how thick those arteries get as we get older and improve that. And I've even had some studies on myself that showed dramatic changes in the right direction towards a more youthful structure. So here's some quick pictures. Here's a lady before using the patches, and you can see wrinkling in her neck, around her lips and mouth, and certainly on her forehead and her eye area. This is after just a few weeks of using the patches, and you can see improvement in that skin all around. Here's another one. Here's her pictures on day one, again around the mouth and lips and neck. This is 30 days later. We're already seeing dramatic improvement in this area on the chin and in the neck. And here is 4.5 months later, and an amazing renewal of her skin structure. And probably one of the best scenarios is, here's a lady on day one. We can see the upper eyelid getting thicker and drooping a little, certainly the wrinkles underneath and the wrinkles in the neck and around the nose, a little on her forehead. Here's 42 days later. We're seeing dramatic improvement, certainly around here. Look at the skin around the eye beginning to lift higher, and the eye is more open rather than that lid drooping more. And here's after 1 year of use. Eye much more in. Go back and look at pictures of you when you were younger. That eyelid begins to come down. Look at the skin under her eyes, dramatic improvement. The lines on her forehead and neck and around the mouth. So this is the kind of stuff that these patches can do for you. Bring back a more youthful state. Hair growth is another thing. It wasn't one of the things they were looking for right away, but they started noticing it. And here's some examples of that. Here's a scalp before, and this is after using. Here's another gentleman. You can see a beginning of thickness. And here's one that has used the patches for about a year, going from this thinning to a little bit thicker. So I'm not saying it's going to bring you back to when you were 20 years old with a full head of hair, but it certainly shows dramatic improvements there. Scar reduction. Again, we go back to collagen. When we have an injury, the collagen of the skin matrix that repairs that injury is under stress, inflammation, and other things. A lot of times it doesn't make a nice scar. We've seen a lot of scar remodeling, thinning of scars, that wormy look, the raised look, all of that improving dramatically. Wound healing in itself, the speed at which wounds heal, dramatically important. And of course, that makes sense because our stem cells are what rejuvenate and fix that. If we break a bone, we could put the bones back together, but what weaves those two bone tissues together? Stem cells coming in, changing themselves from a stem cell to a bone cell and weaving that bone back together. The greater proliferation of stem cell activity, the quicker and better that healing process can be. Here's some examples of injury. Here's a young man who was in an accident, and you can see a severe laceration, nerve endings, tendons in his hand and wrist cut, and they weren't sure he was going to get full utilization of that hand back. This is just 63 days later. You can see where he's been placing his patch, but look at the improvement within a matter of a few weeks. And this is his hand, 2.5, not even, well, a few days longer than 2 months. Now we can see where that injury was. So if you want, we can look at it here, but look at how well it is healed through here. Now, this is a little 9-year-old boy who had his finger smashed in a door and severed the tip of the finger off. They were able to sew it back on, but because of poor blood circulation, you can see the skin beginning to die back. And upon using the X39s, this is the healing he got in a matter of a few months. I think this was about 4 months. And the finger totally regenerated, full feeling in it, nail grew back, the whole bit. So this is the kind of activity we're getting. So youth renewal is what X39 can do for you. And in doing so, it can extend our life, because the longer we can repair tissue and not let it begin to denigrate, the longer we should be able to have in a lifespan there. So the global expansion, just to show you how this is going, because it is proliferating throughout the world quite a bit. Billions are still being spent on research and treatments, but LifeWave's global sales have gone up dramatically. In 2018, so this was prior to the release of the X39 stem cell patch, the other patches that were in their system, the company did about $12 million. January of 2019, they released X39. The sales in 2019 jumped from 20 to 70 million. We haven't gotten figures yet on the finals of 2020, but in the latter part of the year, they were estimating sales in 2020 exceeding 220 million. I've heard that they actually exceeded that and was well over $250 million in sales. And so the company's on track to be $1 billion company in sales on an annual basis in less than 3 to 5 years now, because this is a product that is readily available to the general public. It has got a patent, it's been proven to work, and it does what it says it does, and it makes it available to the average person. So lives are certainly being changed with the X39. Now, let's talk about our cells in general and why water is so important. Of course, we all know without water and sunlight, we can't exist. But even a small amount of dehydration affects our cell performance. For every 3% of dehydration, our cells lose 10% of their ability to do work. Now, if we're an athlete on the football field, that shows up in that 3-hour game as a slow decline in their ability to perform. But think of our heart muscle. It's a muscle. 3%, we lost 10% of those cells' ability to do their work. We don't get thirsty until we're 10% dehydrated. We actually get hungry at about 5, nature's way, because so much of water in our past came from the foods we eat. If we ate a lot of fresh fruits and vegetables, we get a lot of the proper structure of water through that process. So we actually get hungry at about 5%, but we get thirsty at 10%. At that point, we've already lost 30% of the functionality of all cells within our body. And of course, stem cells are cells. If they're dehydrated stem cells, they're going to perform less. So there's no question that we see people who can stay hydrated get far greater use and improvement from the use of these cells. Now, we have a problem. The waters that we drink, because of the process that we go through to purify water and make it available to the general public through municipalities, that process changes the structure of the water and puts it into a structure that, and I'm not saying it's not necessary, because obviously it is. We have to have clean water or we'd all be dying of dysentery. But unfortunately, that process changes the structure of the water molecules, puts it into a positive charge platform, and our bodies then can only absorb about 15 to 17% of that water. Now, the average person needs to stay properly hydrated about 3 liters of water a day. So that's about 99, getting close to 100 ounces of water a day. If you drank a gallon of water, that's 128 ounces. If you're only absorbing 15%, you're getting 30 to 40 ounces absorbed possibly into your cells. You're still dramatically dehydrated throughout the day. And of course, all of your cells are not performing. Your kidney, your liver, your lungs, go on down the list, but stem cells certainly. So if you're going to take the time to do the things necessary to improve this peptide, remember in the very beginning, I said that one of the things that is responsible for the serum levels of the blood of this peptide is pH. It is a pH sensitive. if we're not getting hydrated properly, if we're not removing toxins from our cells, which positively charged water doesn't do, our cells become acidic, our body becomes acidic, and consequently, we cannot have high levels of the peptide in our system. So we reduce the body's ability to build the proper levels of our GHK copper peptide to perform the function that we're looking for it to do in increasing our stem cell activity. So how do we get optimum levels and get a slightly alkaline body? Well, we have to drink the proper structured water. We have to stop the overburdening of our buffering system by drinking acidic solutions and things of that sort. And we've got to get rid of the acid waste that our cells produce through the typical metabolization of our food. If we can't get that out of the cell once it's being produced, then our cells become acidic. So let me show you how that works. And it's called electrolyzed reduced water. This happens naturally in nature. When a plant takes up water and goes through the photosynthesis process, it uses the sun, just like a solar panel would do, to change the electrical structure of that water, and it basically produces electrolyzed reduced water. What is electrolyzed reduced water? It happens in nature in other forms too. So if we look at our water molecule, 1 oxygen, 2 hydrogens, H2O. Electrolyzed reduced water is an electrical activity that splits one or both of these hydrogen atoms off the water. It then pushes it, we're actually separating the water into 2 different flow patterns. The hydrogens move to this side, and H1, 1 hydrogen atom, is a strongly positive charged atom. And the more hydrogen we have in a solution, the greater the acidity of the solution. So if we're starting to break these and pulling some of these hydrogens and putting them on the left side, what's left over here on the right? Well, we have oxygen molecules because we may have taken both of them. We have some H2. Now H2, 2 hydrogens that are fused together, is actually a negatively charged ion. So very different than H1. It does not increase the acidity level of the solution. And then we have some OH negative hydroxyl ions. And I'm going to show you how important they are in the process of cleaning up our cells. So let's look at our basic cell. The interior of the cell needs to be negatively charged in order to conduct electron flow, signals from our brain. We're an electrical being. If we cannot have an electron flow through our tissue, that tissue can't get signals and understand what it's supposed to do. The exterior of our cells are positively charged, and ideally the cell should be in balance. Now, as we metabolize food, one of the waste items, the ash, we can call it, of the burning of fuel, is positively charged hydrogen atoms. And since they are positively charged, they're going to stick to the wall of a negatively charged cell. As they do, number one, they don't readily leave the cell. That's a problem. And as they build up in the interior of the cell, because we have more H1, the acidity level begins to climb. Acidic solutions repel oxygen, so the cell can no longer reach its optimum oxygen levels. It is now acidic. As it does that, it begins to overwhelm the buffering system that's trying to bring that cell back to a slightly alkaline situation, which it can't do because there's so much additional acidity in there, or acid. The other thing that happens is we neutralize the charge on that portion of the cell. So eventually, when the cell fills up with this, it no longer is negative interior. It cannot conduct electron flow. It stops receiving signals from the brain. It becomes inactive. So think if that's a heart cell. It stops pumping and squeezing. So you see, as people age and their bodies get more and more acidic, all of a sudden their heart rate starts going down. Less and less cells are active and working. They need a pacemaker to jolt it with more electricity in our brain sending it to try to get more of these cells active, when in effect they're just sitting on the sideline because they're so full of acid, they're not receiving signal. Now, back to when we start changing the water structure through municipality purification processes. In doing so, we strip some of the electrons out of the water molecules, hence they become positively charged. And in doing so, they begin to cluster together in very large clusters of 16 to 30 molecules, trying to share some of those electrons in the in different atoms. So if I try to shove this big old cluster of water into this little small membrane that allows water in the cell, that's like trying to shove a baseball into a golf ball size hole. It won't fit. The other thing is the exterior of the cell, in particular, the membrane that allows fluid in the cell, is extremely positively charged. So now I'm trying to push two ends of a positive magnet together. It repels this. This is the reason we only absorb 15 to 17% of the water we consume, because the water fills the connective tissue around the cell, but because it's being repelled, and even if it gets close, it's too big to fit into the hole, we don't get enough of it into the cell. Now, every time our heart beats, once this tissue becomes engorged with water, when our heart beats and we compress that tissue, we actually jam some of it into the cell membrane. And that's how we get some of that water in there, but it's not an efficient way. And we're building up all of this acid waste. Now, remember, if we're burning, let's look at a gas flame on a stove. If we mix the right amount of oxygen with the gas, we get a pretty tight white-blue flame that puts off very little waste, soot. Put a pot on it, cook, take the pot off, the pot's not black. It's a very efficient burn of that fuel. But if we take some of the oxygen away, which is what happens in an acidic cell, since the cell can no longer saturate itself properly because the acidity is repelling oxygen, now all of a sudden we get a big yellow-blue flame on our stove. And we put a pot over that, it begins to soot that pot up immediately because of the inefficiency of that burn. And exacerbating the process, because now we're producing a lot more waste. And what is that waste? That waste is positively charged hydrogen. So we make the cell worse and worse. Now let's go over to how we remove acid. One other point, even if this water that we're drinking is alkaline water. And what is alkaline water? Alkaline water is water that is full of alkalizing minerals. We can take water and add baking soda to it, sodium bicarbonate, and we can make it alkaline. That doesn't change its structure. It doesn't change its charge. So it will not get into the cell any better than the tap water that you just added the sodium bicarbonate to. And the little bit that does get in there is positively charged. It's going to leave all of this acid waste in there. So let's go over to what electrolyzed reduced water can do. Now we have charged this with all of its electron fields are full. So now we have individual ions instead of big clusters of molecules. We have some H2Os, they're negatively charged. We have a bunch of those hydroxyl ions because we pulled one of those hydrogens off. They're negatively charged. We have some oxygen that has got both of the hydrogens pulled and is just pure oxygen, again, negatively charged because all of its electron fields are full. It now gets pulled to it. Try to put a negative and a positive end of the magnets together, and as they get close, they pull together. So these ions are being drawn into the cell rapidly. This is the super hydrating ability of electrolyzed reduced water. Instead of 15 to 17% of this water entering the cell over a 3 to 4 hour period, we can get about 98 to 99% of this structure of water into the cell in 2 to 3 minutes. Super hydrating ability. Once inside the cell, these hydroxyl ions have stronger negative charges than the cell wall. So they can come in and pluck all of these hydrogens back off the wall. In doing so, they produce a water molecule. When the water molecule leaves the cell, it takes all of that acid waste that is over here out of the cell. Doing two things, reducing the acidity of the cell. The cell now can saturate with oxygen, burns fuel much more efficiently, as well as reducing the load on the buffering system, allowing our natural buffering system to regulate the pH of the cell to a slightly alkaline scenario. So you get superhydration, you get detoxification of the cell and cleanliness of its acid waste, as well as you get recharging of the cell wall, because as we get rid of all of this that was neutralizing its cell wall, the cell regains its proper charge. It then begins to conduct electron flow, so that heart muscle cell that was just sitting there because it was all clogged up and didn't know what to do, all of a sudden begins to beat again strongly, and now you've revitalized that. So this is the process that we need, and consuming electrolyzed reduced water, which again happens throughout nature, not only in plants, but in other formats, is the proper structure that gives us the ability to do what we need to do. So it's critically important to stop drinking these highly acidic waters. 99% of the waters that are bottled are all acidic, increasing the acid load to our system, overwhelming the buffer system even further, not hydrating the cell. Unfortunately, so many of them are so full of toxins, instead of detoxifying a cell, it's actually adding toxins to our body that we don't want to do. So if you've been invited to this call, a number of the people on here know all about the process that and the machine that was discovered to be able to produce this water. There is only one that does it from the original people who designed this. And there's been a lot of knockoffs that have tried to come in the market and imitate it. As usual, a lot of those knockoffs come in, do a quick job, inefficiently, don't do what this does, but try to capture the market to sell some quick product. And we see a lot of that, but they won't do what this does. It is critically important to drink this particular water. In doing so, it gives you all of the basic tools to allow your stem cells to go in and repair this tissue very, very quickly. We see much greater response in people who are drinking this water versus those who are not. And I just hopefully explain to you the reasons why. So activate your stem cells with the X39. Drink electrolyzed reduced water and improve that functionality dramatically. So get with the person who invited you here tonight. They can explain it in further details. I'm going to finish out and open this to some questions and answers if anybody has any. And that's my presentation for tonight. Hopefully I've created some thought and you all have some questions for me.
So Glenn, that was really amazing. And I just want to do a quick recap because I think there's so much vital information inside of this whole presentation. And the one thing that I think is really that stands out to me is how it helps heal the lung tissue. And I'm just going to give a quick little testimony from my husband. He has severe COPD. He's been hospitalized before. He was nebulizing and so forth. And once we started wearing the patches, you know, as his body came into balance and we were doing all the right things, he very rarely now needs to nebulize. That's his story. And it's just really so amazing to see that just this one little patch can have such a life-changing effect, but also the ability to regenerate nerves. And, you know, that we can do it inexpensively, you know, for less than a cup of coffee a day. And I know that your wife had some knee issues. And so we also know that wearing the stem cell patch over time can regenerate cartilage and bone. And could you address that a little bit more, Glenn?
Well, knees are difficult because two things. Number one, is very low blood supply area to rebuild that cartilage, so it takes time, versus a soft tissue that has readily available blood supply. We get a greater and more prolific activity there. And the other thing is you're walking on them all the time. So, you know, you're doing damage on a day-to-day basis. So the little bit you repair, it takes a long time to overcome the day-to-day damage, much less repair all the old damage. So catching those problems much earlier before, and that goes back to our proactive conversation, is critical. But yes, it will. Now, it also depends on what other damage in the knee, because a lot of times when you've had bone on bone for a long time, you now have necrosis of the bone, and now you're having to heal and regenerate bone tissue as well as cartilage tissue, and all of those things come into play in order to become pain-free. But can you notice some change? Yeah, I mean, and she's noticed change throughout time. Does she still have problems with the knee? Yes. Have we been able to delay any other treatments? Dramatically for years now. And when it used to be 24 hours nagging and keeping her awake, not being able to sleep and those kinds of things, she now has a lot of days where once she's off of it, the inflammation goes down quickly and she gets relief throughout the night. It's when she's walking on it heavily that it can cause issues more, but it's moving ahead. But one of the things I had right when we started these patches is I had fallen. Um, we were moving my daughter and I was in the back of a pickup truck handing stuff out. And when we got finished, I went to jump down and the shoestring on my left foot got caught in the tailgate panel where the plastic hits the thing. And so as I jumped off, that foot didn't leave and it rolled me around and I ended up falling on my right hip. And I severely damaged my sciatica nerve in my hip. Um, I had been having treatments of all kinds that happened in November. This was already March, so 5 months with absolutely no effect. My foot numb, tremendous pain all the way down into my foot, down the side of the leg, and just no response. We started using the patches, and within 3 days, I woke up the third day with no pain in that leg, which was just amazing. If you'd have told me, give it 3 to 4 months, it might do that, I would have said, okay, maybe. But to happen in just a matter of a few days was amazing. And I
It's
haven't,
truly,
it was crazy. I would have not believed it if it just hadn't happened to me. But then again, now we've been dealing with this well over a year, and so many people we've helped with this. We've watched this happen over and over and over and over again with people. And but the other great thing and important to me, and it goes back to why I emphasize being proactive, is I had a test, one of those carotid artery ultrasounds that measure a few things in your carotid arteries. Number one is their blockage in them. Number two, the thickness of the wall of the artery, because as we age, that collagen, go back to that collagen matrix, isn't as good. So the artery has to be thicker in order to provide the same support. As it gets thicker, it doesn't flex well. So now we're pumping blood through a non-flexible hose, so it squirts harder. So you see people with blood pressure increases later in life for that. So when we did that, one of the other things they can see is, or they give you what's called a vascular age. And it's basically looking at the average person's age of those vessels based on your clinical age. And they typically tell you it's going to be close to, but in all likelihood, slightly older. So I had that test done. I was 66, and my vascular age was 67 to 68, about what they expected. I started using the patches. 90 days later, because of the clinical trials saying that, wearing the patches reduces your vascular age because you improve the matrix of the vessel thins, it starts to flex again, all of these things improve. So I had the ability through one of our physicians that work with our other consulting company, and we did it again. And so I had a very small amount, 1% plaque in that artery. That was gone, first of all. The artery had really thinned compared to what it was, and it became far more flexible. So it was improving. I didn't have high blood pressure, but my pressure wasn't ideal like it used to be when I was much younger. That pressure has actually come down slightly. So what do you think in a less than 90-day period of using the patches, my vascular age went down to? From 60, almost 87. And I'm 67 now. So that improvement is dramatic. And, that's
it's remarkable. It really is. And one of the things, I'm glad that you said your age, because I've known you for several years now. And when I look at you, it's like I can see the reversal of age. And you really do have like such a beautiful baby face. And
not sure I'd agree with that, but
no, I mean, truly, your skin, it's just, it's very radiant. And I did want to, the last person that you showed on the aging process, her name is Mandy Rowe, Rowe, and you can look her up on Facebook and you can see the dramatic change. Even now, she's so youthful looking. She lives in Australia. And so y'all can look her up and you can see like, wow. So we do have some questions, and
okay.
We have one from Leslie, and the question is, does cell regeneration occur even where damage was done over 20 years ago?
Actually, yes. And that's where we see changes in scar tissue, because that's obviously damage that could be way back. Um, so you end up getting remodeling of tissue in that area. So yes, you can actually regenerate damaged tissue in areas you would have never thought that you could. I mean, I have a client who is a young man who had a stroke, found out he had a hole in his heart that he didn't know he had, and it clotted over and he passed the clot. So at 40 years old, he had a massive stroke. He had lost use of one side of his body, completely numb, couldn't put his foot on the floor because he couldn't feel it. You all who have had dental work know how that feels. You deaden your lips, you can't even push them together to stop liquid from flowing out of it. And that was a problem he was having. He couldn't take a sip of water without it leaking out of one side of his body that was numb. One of the horrible things was his voice dramatically changed because of the speech area of his brain that was damaged, and his eyesight. In one eye, he could only see light with no specific vision. And a lot of the eye was black with the exception of the kind of the center. In the other eye, he said it was like looking through a straw. He could see that one little spot, everything else was black, but it was blurry. So he could see figures, he could see that it was a person, but he couldn't make any clarity on it. And the doctor said, well, unfortunately, the section of your brain that the clot damaged controls your vision. And that's not, once you damage it, it's not going to come back. So unfortunately, you're going to be blind. Well, they started using the patches, probably out of desperation, and why not give it a try, right? Within 60 days, the right eye that had the little straw vision, clear in the center, and about 80% of the peripheral vision had come back. In the left eye that had no vision, he got vision back, and it had about 40% of upper quadrant peripheral vision that was gone. His eyesight got good enough, and his motor function on his left side that was damaged, he could feel again. He can now walk without, his feet feeling the floor, and he has control over his feet. They actually allowing him to drive now. So he's got enough vision and control to drive. Now, those nerve endings are coming back like we know they will. And as damaged as they were, unfortunately, that probably will take time. So he says it feels like pins and needles down that side all the time. But he's seeing all of that improvement. His voice response has gotten far better. And so now he can speak to you and you can understand everything he's saying. I mean, we've changed it. And the doctor's response was, I don't know how this could happen because that part of your brain died. Well, we know that we're regenerating that tissue with stem cells. We're replacing all of that dead tissue with new brain cells created by the stem cell. They did see in his test that he had far more blood supply to that area of the brain that had been damaged. So those are the kind of results we're getting. And if that should answer that question, yes, you can regenerate. The longer the injury was in the past, the longer it may take. And remember, all of us are not going to be 20 again. So this isn't, drop a quarter into the machine and our bodies start vibrating at a 20-year-old rate again. But it will improve. And in some cases, if we're old enough and we have enough problems, if we stop going downhill, that's a big improvement. And it will extend the utilization of active life at that point.
Wow. I mean, that is just really incredible. So we do have another question, and that is, will it help bunions?
Well, keep in mind what bunions are. What bunions can be caused from a number of things. Most often it's caused from pressure on your foot. So a lot of times a shoe, you can get a new shoe and you get a blister, but if you keep that shoe and it's putting pressure on a spot, you will start to form a bunion or a callus. And underneath that can get the nerves underneath that hard callus, especially since pressure still gets put on it, can become quite painful. So there's a number of things we can do. Number one, I would change the cause of what's putting the pressure on there. That's important. Again, we got to go back to stopping the assault on the area. And then, you can trim back all of the dead skin tissue, get it smooth so it's not a big old lump sitting out there, easily getting things pressured on it. And that can go away. So yes, I've seen quite a bit of that too, where actually one of the dermatologists that work with us said, we can clean these things up, and with the use of this and changing a shoe or whatever else, the healing is remarkable. We've got some plastic surgeons who are using the patches when they do surgery. The improvement in the healing process and the quality of the scar tissue, especially when you're dealing with face plastic surgeries in the face area where you certainly don't want scars, he said is so improved that he recommends it to all of his patients, and he can show results on patients that he may have done one side of a face or an eye and then done the other one, and one with and one without the patch because of the way he got introduced to him. He said it's remarkable the change, the healing factor and everything else. So yeah, I think you can get some improvement in even old injuries.
Wow. I know I keep saying wow because it really, every time I hear you do the presentation, and I've said it before, I learned something new that I haven't heard before. And one of the things that I heard today that I hadn't heard before was that how the stem cells talk to each other and how it can turn off and turn down damaging and destructive cells. I thought that was very fascinating. So people who have autoimmune disorders, this
Correct.
is like a perfect uh, patch for them to
Yeah.
wear to
We've had
help
people
people
with
manage.
Parkinson's disease with a lot of neuropathy in their feet. Within weeks, the neuropathy goes away. They're walking again on it. Their shakes are reduced. So we're repairing not only damage that has taken place in the brain, but we know Parkinson's, one of the problems is the brain's not producing enough dopamine. And so the chemical cascade of problems that come with that. So very measurably, we can see the change by measuring those dopamine levels, and using the patch, we see improvement in dopamine levels and consequently improvements in all kinds of their symptoms improving. So again, catching things early before they do too much damage so that we don't have to repair as much is critical also. Somebody
What
asked in the chat, does it reduce blood pressure? Well, remember, none of it. Our body is the only thing that can heal itself. I have to go back to a quick little example. If you skin your knee, if you bandage it and you protect it and you stop any further assault, it'll heal itself in a few weeks. But if every day you knock the scab off of it, you're going to have that busted knee for years to come. You've got to stop the assault first. Then you have to provide the body with its nutritional things, its building blocks in order to build and repair. That's part of what we're doing with not only the patches by improving all of that regenerating tissue, but the body's the only thing that heals itself. We can reduce inflammation through drugs. We can reduce symptoms, but unless it heals itself, all we do is delay the agony that comes with the disease or the damage. So give it its proper tools and it will find a way. So directly, I will say the patch doesn't reduce blood pressure, just like it doesn't heal anything else. Indirectly, it gives the body what it needs to do it on its own. So in the form of blood pressure, remember, if we harden that artery and now I have a restricted flow, I put a greater pressure out. If that artery can stretch every time our heart beats and absorb some of that pressure, we're not trying to pump it so hard. It's like taking a nozzle and ratcheting it down. When you restrict that flow, it sprays much further. So yeah, as their arteries improve in their flexibility, then you absorb some of that pressure every time the heart beats, you see a reduction in blood pressure because that's what was causing the increase in blood pressure.
Well, let's see if there are any other questions because it's getting late and I want to, we value everyone's time and we know that you just got back from vacation. So are there any other questions? You can unmute yourself. Well, it looks like that's a wrap, Glenn.
Well,
You
good.
are totally
I hope
amazing.
everybody, and if questions come up, y'all know how to get in touch.
Yes.
And I'm more than happy to help in any way and answer any questions y'all may have in the future. Good
Well, thank
luck
you
to
very
everybody. I
much.
look forward to some of the new people on here to let us know a month from now. We do this presentation the first Tuesday of every month. So anybody new who decides to give this a try, we'd love to hear from you all next month of how you've seen it help you.
Yes, because we love to hear testimonies from people who try the patch, and 85% of the people that I personally patch have an amazing result almost instantly. And then there's the other 15% that might take a little longer.
Depending
So
on the circumstance, yeah.
yes,
Proper expectations. Like I said, we're not gonna put a patch on and wake up tomorrow and be able to run a marathon.
you might want to, but it'll take time. Thank you, everyone,
Thanks,
for
everybody.
showing up.
Wonderful to see everybody's face. Good night.
Bye-bye. Good night. Thank you.